All right, just making sure that record button is going. Thank you.
All right. Hi, I'm Misty Montag, and I am the aftercare supervisor for Douglas County and Shawnee County. There are two workers, in-home specialists in Douglas County. That's Lonnie Mann and Thomas Toland. So at any point, I do have a presentation, but at any point during the presentation, if you have a question, feel free to jump in and we can answer it then, or you can ask it at the end. I tend to over talk or expand on stuff, so just let me know. Just stop me at any point. So,
Misty, I apologize. Can you see your PowerPoint?
I got my PowerPoint pulled up on my screen. So
okay, Lonnie, can you see the PowerPoint? I might need some tutoring to remind myself how to get that set up the right way.
I see part of it, but I do not know anything about the sharing the screen. I've never done that. So
okay. Well, I will work on that, but just so you guys know, it's looking funny to me. So if any volunteers are good at PowerPoint and want to text or call my cell phone, otherwise it's been emailed to CASA staff and to all CRB members. All right, sorry about that.
Not a problem. And I'll just kind of go through it and I'll expand. So some of the fundamentals of aftercare is our services last for 6 months from the time the child reaches permanency. So whether that's they're placed at home, the adoption occurs, they've aged out, it's 6 months from that date of whenever the previous worker puts in the PCF to state that permanency was achieved. Anything beyond that 6 months, we contract with DCF and do a client service agreement. And so then it's all about how many hours we spend each time with them after that. A few things that are different than permanency that I think scares people when they initially hear about aftercare is we cover our own crisis and after hours phone calls. And I think that could be intimidating, especially if you're from the world of permanency where there's a lot of after hours stuff. However, the nice thing about it in aftercare is that we specifically know our families. We taught our families what a crisis looks like, the steps to handle a crisis, and when to call us. The other thing too is that we frequently find an aftercare is that we may find it out after the crisis because the families either handled it on their own and they're just kind of telling us, oh, by the way, this happened, or we're finding that out later because they're still pretty protective in that fear of the kids getting removed again or something being reported. So a lot of families will handle things and then tell us later, which is fine. It just kind of probably depends on what the crisis is. But those are the key aspects of differences between aftercare and anyone else. So who do we serve? We serve everyone. If I always tell people, if you just for everyone that you've seen. So if you had them on your caseload, send them to us. So we get everyone that's aging out of care, any adoption cases, any guardianship cases. We get all the reintegration cases. So, and those may include kids who've been reintegrated and DCF custody and court custody may immediately be released, or reintegrated cases that custody and jurisdiction are still there. The only difference between when DCF custody is no longer involved, that buy-in for us to continue to be actively working with the family has diminished a little bit. And our need for and how much services we provide may automatically decrease based on the need of the family. And if they go out of state, we typically are still serving them, except for on the condition that they are released from custody and directly placed with their parents. That is the only time our cases close. There are a few exceptions where DCF in the court may agree that aftercare is not needed for whatever reason, or let's refer them to family pres versus aftercare. So those are a few exceptions. They're few and far between, but we serve all of our cases, adoption, guardianship, and reintegration for those 6 months. That the OPLA cases, guardianship, and adoption cases are very clear cut 6 months. Reintegration cases tend to go more on the timeline of when court is. We also run into the fact that on the adoption, guardianship, and OPLA cases, they may not, a lot of times they're done with KVC. They reached permanency, the adoption happened, they aged out, and frankly, they probably don't want to ever hear from us again. And so we try to work with them, try to get the buy-in to meet with them. But a lot of times we're doing good if we could get a monthly phone call in just to check in. But they will frequently reach out to us if they need something during that time, or even afterwards. A lot of times they'll reach out and we'll still provide the help. So who do we work with at KVC? The permanency team, we get majority of our referrals from them. We get referrals from the adoption team. We work with admissions in regards to, that's where we get any ICPC cases. And those are the kids that are being placed here from out of state. So we're working with admissions, the ICPC coordinator. And we may be working with admissions if the child needs respite, or if, heaven forbid, they have to come back into custody, then we're working with admissions to find a placement for when that happens. Primarily, we're sending referrals to KVC outpatient therapy for therapeutic services. If they have anyone available, it's a really good resource, especially because they go into the family's home. If a child's already been receiving KVC services for therapy, those will continue. The only services that don't continue through the outpatient part is medication management, and those stop once the child goes home, and we need to facilitate getting them connected with a doctor or the mental health center where they're going to be living at. The other part of KVC that we may work with is the SUD services, so the substance abuse team. And that's another great one because they're in the home, they can go into the home, so the family doesn't have to worry about transportation. Lonnie or Thomas, did I miss anyone that we work with? Just holler if I need to add anything, you do.
I can't think of anybody else.
Yeah.
Misty, this is Heather.
Uh-huh.
And I know the question was within KVC, but do you also make referrals to community service providers?
Yes, so,
I just want to clarify that.
yes, and I have that in kind of the second slide. So if,
Okay.
so a lot of times it's all about, like, with aftercare, we tell our families our services are short term. 6 months may seem like a long time, but it's not. So we want to get them connected with services that's going to help them in the long run. So yeah, so sometimes it is having to transition to the mental health center and making referrals. Or I know with, just because there's a huge mental health need and sometimes very few options. It's not only the mental health center, but we're contacting like every single independent contractor within the area and just kind of going down the list and helping the families make those phone calls to see who has availability to see them. If they're younger than like 3 or 4, we're connecting them with tiny K or infant toddlers, parents as teachers. If they need housing, we're connecting them to the local housing authority, any low income options. So kind of a day in the life of an intensive in-home specialist. I just try to hit the highlights. There's way more things than we do than this. So one of the first things we do is a transition meeting. So when we get a new case, I will assign it to Thomas or Lonnie. And then we schedule with the previous worker, and we kind of just review the case. What brought the kid into custody? What's the progress the family has made? What services do they currently have? What progress has the parents made? What services do they have? What services will they need? With summer coming on, a lot of times we're asking, what's their summer plans? Who's watching the kids while mom and dad work? It's kind of trying to fill in those gaps of trying to get a good picture of the family during the transition meeting. We're also asking about the non-custodial parent. The second thing we do is home visits. We also write reports. Those are so we submit monthly reports to ICPC about our families, and then we submit reports to DCF, a summary of the progress, and then any court reports. So that can take half a day to like a full day of kind of doing stuff, depending on how many cases or whatever's going on. Also completing logs. My staff is really good at keeping logs up, because I try to encourage them, don't get too far behind. It quickly adds up. So we try to stay within that month of logs. So we're connecting families with resources. That's kind of what I was talking about earlier, is making those referrals. I've been in child welfare for over 18 years. And honestly, the best resource I've ever encountered are families. They're going to be the first one to usually tell me about a new resource out there, a new support system, and then we pass it along. We're also contacting collateral contacts. So that could be the CASA worker involved with the family, contacting the school. Sometimes it's being in contact with like their support system or a respite option. we also, so the one thing that is different from permanency to us is that, once we receive a case, we're completing a whole new set of assessments with the family. We're having them sign new paperwork, and I attach those along too. And a lot of times we do that is because depending on how long they've been in care, it could have been a long time since the family signed anything. And frequently, the worker may have signed the stuff previously. So we want to make sure we're getting the parents to sign the new releases. We're attending court. So Lonnie and Thomas serve Douglas County, but that could mean, like, say if someone from Hiawatha and Brown County moved to Douglas County to Lawrence, then frequently we get that referral. Or if they moved from like Topeka to Douglas County, we're getting those referrals because we're able to see them more consistently than the worker that may originally be from that office. So we're typically attending court in Douglas County, but if we do have a transfer case, we would be attending it in the previous counties. And lastly, we do complete UAs. If that's a concern, we're still monitoring it. It's probably a little bit more random and less frequently than was maybe prior for an impermanency, or if impermanency, they decreased it to very low amounts. It's telling the family like, hey, we're going to be asking you for random UAs. It may not seem fair, but it's just so that we're making sure we're documenting the original concern. Okay. Lonnie and Thomas, is there anything you think I missed about your daily lives? It can be busy, but we also, because our schedules are pretty flexible, it really, we're able to fit it around when a good time is for the client and for us. So then I would say majority of our time is those home visits. So if we consider the 6 months kind of a spectrum, we see the family intensely at the beginning of the 6 months. And then our goal is to kind of gradually decrease contact from weekly to like bi-weekly, then to monthly. The thing I always encourage workers to do is to not set a specific amount of home visits. Like, oh, we're going to do 2 months of weekly home visits or so many weeks of week, because I'll tell you what, that client will remember it. And on that day that you met that quota, they will say, okay, we're done with this part, right? And so I always give people the spectrum of like, this is how it typically is. There may be a few families that we can decrease contact more immediately because of the reason for concern or what's going on that is just not needed to be intense. And then I tell people on the other spectrum is there are some families where we are in there weekly, that whole 6 months or more until we leave. Visits on average last an hour. And those kind of will go up and down depending on what we're doing, what's going on. A good way to kind of tell when that time is probably done is if you go from covering everything you need to cover, you taught them what you needed to do, and you're becoming more chatty than anything. That kind of that's probably when you're at, probably at the end of that visit. There are other families who will talk your ear off, or there's always something going on. So those families can last a lot longer, and sometimes the workers will purposely plan like another visit afterwards, or will say they have another visit afterwards just to be able to end it, because you frequently have your hand on the door and then it's one more thing. We do have the ability to go out to the family and see them more than once. So if we're taking them, if we have court that week, or if we're taking them somewhere and connecting them with a resource, we may still then have a home visit. The other thing is during the home visits, we have to see all the kids in DCF custody at least once a month. So because we're in that home maybe 4 to 5 times a month, we will tend to schedule our visits on who we want to see. So if we're needing to address something with the parent, have them complete a packet for services, we may go at a time when the kids aren't there. It's just going to be quicker. And then or we may schedule it to where it's towards the end of the school day or something. And so we're seeing mom or dad a little bit alone, and then the kids come home, we're able to see them. If a family cancels, then we do our best to reschedule for that week, if not next. Honestly, it takes a lot for a family to no-show. If you really don't want to meet with us, you really have to go out of your way to actually not be at your home during our visits. Because otherwise, most often than not, you're probably at home. But no-shows and cancellations happen all the time. If it's a frequent family that's doing it, we may call and check in before we're going. So during those home visits, we're completing the assessments. We're connecting families with services and resources. We may be making referrals for this services and resources. We're presenting parenting skills. We're addressing any concerns or crisis events that happen. And those could be brought up by us. Like if we got a report from someone or a DCF hotline that's not going to be investigated, but they want us to address it, we do that. Or it could be the family that we go there. And this week, the issue is Billy not doing his homework. And so then we'll be addressing that. We'll do safety planning. We're going to be requesting alone time with the kids in order to get our face-to-face contact with the kids. Usually the thing is, hey, why don't you show us your bedroom? Or, hey, you want to walk us out to the car? The parents can decide the parents may say, no, I don't want you to do alone time or something like that. That happens occasionally. Sometimes that happens naturally where you're visiting with the family, mom or dad will step out and go somewhere else in the house or go outside. So we can use that and talk to them. One of the important things we're doing is teaching problem solving skills, because we want the families to be able to address needs and handle things when things come up. So a lot of it is giving the parents the authority and the ability to solve the problems. skill building, and then a lot of times it's advocating. Depending on how long the kids have been in care, it may be unnatural for the parents to take them to some of these appointments or do things. And so it's reinforcing with the school, it's reinforcing with doctor's office that the kids are back home with mom, or they're back home with dad, or mom and dad, and that they are the ones that are making those decisions. Sometimes it requires a letter or proof from KVC saying, yep, this child reached permanency, they're with mom and dad, please allow them to make these decisions. Because in theory, the family should be able to go to the mental health center and initiate services because they are in their care, they're in their custody. But frequently the mental health center still wants us to do the referral. So we'll still help with that. So, crisis events. These can occur at any time during the day, at night, or whatever, and it's kind of just one we're assessing for safety. What's the situation? What's going on with Billy or Johnny? We're completing if needed, a safety plan with the family. This can be a verbal safety plan if we're unable to see them that day, or if it's happening at night, we're probably going to complete a verbal safety plan and then go make sure we see them the next day, or the next time we see them, we're going to have them complete. We'll put that plan in a written plan so that they know, hey, this is what's going on. This is where teaching them the problem solving skills earlier helps us. So if we had taught them all of these plans, or, we help them walk through different scenarios, and if they call us, it's easier to say, okay, which options have you tried? What worked, what didn't work, and then kind of helping them go, then walking it through there. During a crisis situation, or typically afterwards, we're connecting them with resources or services. Maybe they've been reluctant to connect with a mental health center or do medication, but maybe now, after a meltdown or a tantrum, they might consider it now, where you can say, hey, maybe we can get this as an extra support for you. We're also exploring respite. Ideally, it's someone the family knows that has already had a background check, and now we can get one. Or sometimes it's the previous placement works out as respite. If they're still with KVC or in DCF custody, we can look at a formal arrangement with their KVC foster homes. And I always tell people, like, that in itself, it really just kind of depends on availability, what they can find in regards to placement, and also the fact that we may require the family to provide some of that transportation to the respite. So after the crisis, we're doing our best to notify all the parties. So we may email or call the guardian ad litem, DCF, or the court, just to say, hey, this is what happened and this is how it's settled. And sometimes we'll request a TDM or a red team staffing if it's still like an occurring crisis or something that's just not going to be settled over overnight. And so we need, we might need some other supports. So court, we're typically recommend, our goal for court and for all families is to be able to recommend release of DCF custody and court jurisdiction. So we can safely do this if the family's maintaining their progress. The reason for referral has been addressed. We like for families to be connected to resources who can sustain the progress that they made. And a lot of times it also provides that oversight. So, we know that there's also these other set of eyes on the family, or whether it's the mental health center, the school, or infant toddler program, there are other people who are going to be seeing these kids. So they're not just going to disappear. We could safely recommend release if there's no new DCF hotline reports. And the biggest thing that probably hinders most release is the domestic order, and which is the custody and visitation with the non-custodial parent. So we would recommend
I've lost Misty on my computer. Can a couple of people give me a hand if they also are not hearing Misty anymore?
I'm not. This is Karen.
Okay, thanks.
Sorry, I got kicked out.
There we go.
So if there's lack of progress, we're going to be recommending for the kids to stay in. And then we always try to let our family know about the recommendation. And the reason we do that is because we frequently need their help. So we need them they're the only ones that can obtain that domestic order, or we need their buy-in to maybe complete that last hurdle, that last task. So we're like, hey, if you complete X, Y, and Z, like sometimes at school, if you can get to school these last couple months, I bet I can ask for release, or we're going to need consistent clean UAs, then I can ask for release. So that way the family knows like what's expected of them. We never would want to surprise the family. So ultimately, our goal as aftercare is that we want the family to be able to maintain progress while being able to problem solve and address their issues, concerns, crises in a safe way while they're maintaining and meeting the needs of their kids. I kind of joke with families like, we don't want your kids. We honestly don't. We want them to safely return home with you. And I'll joke with families like, and I hope I never see you again in this setting. We don't want this to continue any longer than it needs to. So there are times when we may have to recommend removal back out of home. And that usually is because the home can no longer safely meet the needs of the kids. And that we would recommend it after we exhausted all of other alternative solutions. So we've done our best. Ideally, we've tried every option. We thought out of the box, and everything we tried, whether it was respite, getting PMTO back involved, mental health services, medication. If we exhausted all of that is when we would probably say there's still concerns and we can't safely maintain them. Sometimes it comes down to the family itself. Sometimes the family member will kind of be on the fence and say, well, I don't want them in that house anymore. And then change their mind and be like, nope, I do. And so that flip-flop stuff can happen. And we try to work with them like other ways to maybe express their discontent or any other feelings than recommending that the kids get removed, because then it just creates uneasy feelings with the kids. So one of the kind of the gray areas that we often work with is the non-custodial parent and domestic orders. So we will do our best to try to maintain at least a monthly contact with the non-custodial parent. And we will typically do this through phone calls. We are not mediators by any means, but we try to encourage whoever has the kids in a reintegration case and the non-custodial parents to coordinate reasonable contact and visits between them and the kids. Sometimes there's a lot of hurt feelings in place. And so we try to encourage them, like, let's focus on the kids, what's best for the kids. If we don't typically supervise visits between non-custodial parents and children. We just don't, we don't have the time. So our caseload is by family, kind of pretty much. So potentially there could be multiple non-custodial parents in a case. And then you multiply that by every family we've doing our normal duties on top of supervising those contacts, it would just be impossible. So we try to stay out of that as much as we can. If it requires supervised visits, if there's still concerns with that other non-custodial parent, whether it's active drug use or abuse or something where there's concerns for safety and needs being met, then we're encouraging the families to use like TFI, their visitation department, or another kind of scheduled visitation site. If there's a family member that will supervise contact, that's even better. Some of the kids know, and that would be free. Whereas if they need to go through an agency for supervision, that will cost them. So the court typically does not like to release kids without a current domestic order or outlining who has custody and visitation, because if they're released without it, in theory, it would revert back to whatever the previous order was for the kids and the parents. So what's happening now is that most attorneys, so the parents' attorneys don't do the domestic order. So it would require the parents to then find someone and pay them to obtain the domestic order. So we try our best to work with the family and different attorneys or the court ways we can handle it, work around it, but that's probably one of our biggest struggles, especially if there's a lot of conflict between the parents. And then our last thing that we do is we do ICPCs. So Aftercare is responsible for writing, completing and submitting a home study on any child that's coming from another state to be placed here in Kansas. And so we do it for our county. So Lonnie and Thomas does it for anyone within Douglas County. They would visit with the family and then write the recommendation whether or not they would recommend placement. And then once, if placement occurs, we meet with the family and the child to provide the supervision, and then we submit either monthly or 90-day reports to ICPC, which is provided to the other state. So that is Aftercare in a nutshell. Melanie and Thomas, did I miss anything? Anything you think you'd like to share from your experience?
Can you hear me, Misty?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I really don't have anything to share, except sometimes I do supervise visits and do transports to food pantries and other food resources. On occasion, I'll pick up a child from school, take them home, depending on the situation that the client's in. So
that's the other difference. Permanency does not transport.
just a few things extra.
Yeah, permanency will not transport parents, but Aftercare is able to transport parents because the parents are the clients too. And so we're able to maybe take the whole family to the food bank or the whole family to a medical appointment. Whereas permanency is unable to do that. The other thing that will happen is they tend to like us a lot better. Usually it's, especially reintegration, it's usually it's a happy note. They're finally done. And so we get the happy end. They're typically not fighting us. Their fight is done. They're willing to work with us for the most part. And sometimes some of our visits, especially at the beginning, maybe just listening. Is just hearing them out for whatever story they want to share about the system, DCF, court, KVC. So that's always just something that they'll talk their ear off to us about. We have less turnover, so a lot of our clients will see one consistent worker for the whole time. So that's always nice. So more of a buy-in, especially if we're able to say, you're going to see us the whole time. You're going to have less workers, that kind of thing.
Do any of today's participants have a question? If you'd like to unmute, and if you want to go on video so we know when someone's going to talk, that would be helpful perhaps. I really appreciate your preparation, Misty. I think you obviously covered all of the questions that we had given to you guys in advance. So if no one has questions, I'll just fill a couple of gaps. You talked about transition meeting, and I might have missed the time frame in which that happens for most cases. I'm guessing at least, I mean, they generally, KVC permanency generally gives the court at least 14 days notice. So is the meeting taking place around that time frame or?
So ideally, we're getting notice. Ideally, we want the meeting and getting notice about 30 days out.
Okay,
So, that way we have a little bit of cushion if it takes us into the next, we try to schedule it within that week, but sometimes we'll have to go into the next week. And in the past, sometimes that happens with newer employees. Sometimes we'll find out once the child's home and we'll get the referral then. So it's always nice that it just sometimes that gives us that free weight if we want to meet with mom or the reintegrated parent prior to the kids going home, so we can reach out and say, hey, got your case. Can we meet with you to start some of the paperwork if we get it before the kids go home? And also there are times when we may staff with permanency. If they're on a case that they feel is stuck or something, they're like, do you feel like this family is ready for aftercare? What steps do you think would need to happen in order for us to get them home? And sometimes some workers may get stuck on a certain task or case plan thing, and just working with them, like, that's something we're not going to be too much worried about. We could probably help the family connect with an ongoing parenting group or something like that. But we want to make sure their housing's maybe a little bit more stable. Like, and if they're moving in with a family member, like, what happens if mom or gets upset with grandma? Like, how stable is those kind of things? So, we just tend to see it a little bit different. And so we'll kind of come from a different perspective of, here's how some things that could happen to move it along from our perspective.
that's really nice to hear. I do try to train volunteers that not all of the services have to be completed that might have been listed before the child goes home, if it's not a safety issue, that there are things that can be done with the child in the home, even after reintegration. So that's nice to hear that you can collaborate with permanency staff and help them in that way.
Yeah.
It's interesting to me that the fact that your workers are on call, but you talk about having less turnover. How do Lonnie and Thomas go on vacation? How do they have days off?
Well, I handle their phone calls. So, or someone else would handle it. So if, like, Lonnie's going on a fabulous vacation next month, she's leaving the country. So, her families would know to contact me.
Okay.
So, but honestly, it's a different crisis. You really know your families. Families, for the most part, want to handle it themselves.
Okay.
There's certain families that may draw you in a little bit more. But yeah, I would say you could probably count, they could probably count on their hands how many times they're getting a call during maybe after hours. And a lot of those may be just a check-in.
Awesome. I put back up the org chart that you gave us. And could you just remind us the counties that you are over?
Yeah.
Because
So
in your line, you have 1, 2, 3, like you have 6 people, but only
Yes.
2 in Douglas County.
2 in Douglas County and 4 in Shawnee.
Shawnee County. Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah, and then Kelly Beal is the director and she's over all of us. Kelly supervises all of Aftercare. So Rachel, the one right beside me, she does Aftercare for the Brown Hiawatha area and then some of the rural, those other rural counties like Jackson, Jefferson, and then Shauna, the last one, she does the metro. So she does Aftercare Metro. So if a family moves from here to the metro, we're contacting Shannon for our cases, and her staff goes down from us.
Mhm.
So Dana and Seth are actually Hiawatha permanency. So everything that Rachel covers in Aftercare, they cover in permanency, and she's the director for that too.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
So we have, for example, a case where the parents moved to Leavenworth County prior to reintegration. Would you guys
So
cover that? It would go to a different,
no, unfortunately, so if the client moves to an area outside of a county that we cover,
Mhm.
we may see if there's someone in that area that could do it. So we might reach out to Shannon and say, hey, does any of your people currently have a case in Leavenworth
Right.
or live close by to where that makes more sense? If not, then we're still responsible. So if it can't be transferred, then we keep it.
Okay. Awesome. I don't want to keep you guys too long. It is 12:55. I just want to offer again for any CASA or CRB volunteers that have questions for Misty, Thomas, or Lonnie to unmute and ask those questions. I'll look around my screen. Anybody see anybody off? All right. Well, again, thank you guys for putting together this presentation for us. We have been recording it, so I will, I hope all my recording kept going, share that for volunteers that were unable to attend. And then we have a gap next Thursday, no in-service, and we'll wrap up the last Thursday in June. We'll have the adoption staff, the adoption specialist and supervisor here with us to talk about their work as well. Maybe, Misty, you could talk a little bit about, do you get very many adoptions taking advantage of aftercare services?
Not really. I mean, what will happen is if they're really nice and they had a good experience and they might let us go ahead and come out to the home once a month.
Mhm.
Otherwise it's usually a phone call or worst case scenario, we're sending the letter. Sometimes if Derek in Shawnee County covers, historically has covered all of our adoption cases. He's probably he'll get contacted by the families that when they're starting to maybe have feelings about disruption or stuff like that. And that's when they'll reach out.
That's what I wondered. Okay.
So, and that can happen at any time. Sometimes it's not happening during our 6 months. They might call him later and say, hey, this is what's going on. And so then he'll reach out to DCF's adoption specialist, like Kelly Shirley and the others, and say, hey, here's a family that's close to disrupting, what services can we offer? And sometimes we're in there and they're still kind of, just based off the need. But that's one of the questions I'll ask during an adoption staffing is, Like, what do you think the odds are of this family disrupting on the child? Especially if they're, it typically happens more, I see, with older kids. And it's going to be a recent issue. Like, and it's more frequently with guardianships than adoptions. And then I'll ask if there's any contact with ongoing, if there's ongoing contact with bio family. That's the other question I really want to know.
Okay. It looks like Nicole Neal had come off of video stop, so I just wanted to see if you were wanting to ask a question. No, okay, okay, great. Well, thanks again for everyone for participating. If you're a CRB volunteer, I've been in communication with a couple of you via text. We'll get that recording out to both CRB and CASA volunteers, and it'll be available to view again. And we'll see you guys in a couple weeks. Thanks again, Misty, Thomas.
Thank
and
you.
Bob.
Bye.
Take care.
Thank
so much.
you.
Thanks.